Welcome everyone to UVM Extension's Building Capacity webinar series. This webinar series is just one part of a larger learning project to help you build capacity for leadership within your organization, as well as more effectively achieve the mission of your organization. The education and training provided in the Building Capacity project is delivered in a variety of forms: webinars and asynchronous learning opportunities, covering 10 topics: board development, conflict management, developing volunteers, ethical leadership, leading through change, quality service, staff development and evaluation, strategic planning, team leadership, and working in teams. Your microphones are muted, and we welcome your questions and comments through the chat box, the area just below the participant list on the left of your screen. You will also find a set of icons just above the participant listing, and we will be using these to engage your participation in the webinar. Currently see raised hand, the second icon from the right, and just to be sure that we've got sound for everyone, if you can hear me, would you please click on that raised hand, and that will show up in the box, and we will know that everyone can hear. Great. Seems to be working. Thanks. If you would like to create your own educational plan for building your leadership skills, there are coaches on the Building Capacity team available to help you. These coaches would help guide you as to which modules to start with and what direction to take within the Building Capacity project. Your educational plan would be based on what your strengths and challenges are in a variety of areas related to leadership, and would be determined from the results of an intake assessment that is available on our website. This coaching is also available if you would rather approach it on a larger level, such as looking at your organization and completing an educational plan with your organization's mission in mind. For more information, contact Building Capacity team. Coaching services are available free of charge. Just send us an email at capacity@uvm.edu and we'll get you started with a coach. And we'll begin by getting some idea of how many people are participating in today's webinar. So, how many individuals are participating with you at your site? Please respond by selecting the letter that corresponds to the number of individuals you have gathered with you for the webinar. And if you will look at that set of icons right next to where your raised hand is, you will see a drop-down box will appear, and there will be 5 choices, the letters which you see on the screen. So A is 1 if you're by yourself, and B if you've got 2 or 5 individuals gathered together, etc. So if you'll let us know how many people are with you, that would be great. Wonderful. So without further ado, I'll turn the microphone over to our presenter, Dr. Martha Walker. And we are thrilled to have Martha back with us for another webinar this year. And her topic is Gathering the Stakeholders, the Process of Community Engagement.
Good morning, everyone. Ellen, I want to especially thank you for inviting me to be back. And before I go any further, let's just check and make sure our sound quality is what you want. So let's practice the raised hand, if that's okay. Or, okay, let's practice a new one. Over on the far left in your icons, there's one for approval and one for disapproval. So if it sounds okay, will you click on approval? Great, thank you. I don't see any disapprovals yet. And then once you've clicked, if you want to go back and you can turn off that icon the same way, that's great. So I think we're on go. So Ellen, thank you so much for inviting me to join this series once more this year and to share with you some information related to community engagement. I bring greetings to you from Virginia Tech and Virginia State University. In Virginia, we have 2 land-grant universities that support the work of extension, and it is my pleasure to work with both. My role, I am employed by Virginia Tech through Virginia Cooperative Extension, and we have 5 community viability specialists that serve the state. I happen to be one of those. We work with local governments and agencies, any type of organization that's working to move the community forward. So you can imagine that my work involves a lot of activity around building partnerships, getting people to sit down and have conversations with each other, and defining the plan that will achieve their goals. Recently, actually it was this past spring, I was invited to speak at a state conference in a little community called the Plains. Interesting name, isn't it? The Plains, Virginia. I think there are about 300 or so residents of this little community. However, this community happens to be located just outside of what we refer to as Northern Virginia. And if you're familiar with Virginia, you know that Northern Virginia is centered around Washington, D.C., and it's high. The population in that area, the economic condition of that area is all at the upper level. So when I was invited to come, I knew that it was not just going to be a little small conference. One of the factors that they wanted me to talk about was what was going on in Virginia and how were communities engaging the residents and what was the impact of that. So based on that, I did a survey with for all of our counties and cities. In Virginia, you may not realize this, but the counties are separate from the cities. It's the way our Constitution of Virginia is set up. So we have 2 different entities. Cities have their own governments and counties have their own local governments. So I surveyed both groups and said, tell me what has gone on in your region that's created some success. What was the issue? Who was involved? What was the impact? And what advice would you have? So based on those results, I took that and began to put together a presentation and filled in the blanks about, okay, so really you made it work, but how did you make it work? And that's what we want to talk about today. Let's see. Ellen, I'm going to advance the slide, but I'm getting into your slides. So there we go. Thank you. Lucy must be managing the magic. We're glad. So when we think about engagement, today we're going to talk about what it is, why is it needed, who makes it happen, what's the process, and then what really happens when it works. Most of us start with an idea. We have this idea that says, yes, we want to do something, and if it were up to us, we would do it immediately. But honestly, I think you would agree that not much is up to one individual, not much. And the decisions require lots of thought process and a lot of input from different members of the community. So we're going to talk about this as we move forward, about what makes this happen and when is it needed. One of the first questions I asked the group, and I want to ask you this too, is how would you define community? So in the chat box, if you could, just enter a couple of words or phrases on how you would define what a community is. Julie, I think you're exactly right. Mark, I'm looking at your group, local group, common interest, meaningful, something meaningful in common, common place. That's right. It's interesting that sometimes we talk about neighbors that are working together. That is a community. So often we think about a community as being a place. I think when you think about the common interest, you're right on that. One of the factors that the Center for Disease Control talked about recently was it was more about who was included and who was excluded. And I never really thought about that communities were defined in some areas by who is excluded from the community. So as extension faculty, as we work in communities, that's something to be considered. So I want to think about that a little bit. All right, so you did so well with that. Now, lay out your definition for engagement. What does that mean, engagement? Inspiring, outreach for participation, commitment, right. The involvement in the decision-making process, sense of connection, right, that they are invested in the resources and they bring it. It's relationship-based. I love it, getting people fired up. That's exactly right. It's not just talking but doing. That's right. We can sit around and talk all day, but there's got to be action. Without any action, then we've just had a conversation, so it doesn't happen. So when we think about this a little bit more, I want to bring all of your thoughts together and give you a summary. And I think all of you have a handout or will have a handout, if not now. That should have been or should be part of this, but we'll talk about how we get that to you. Communities have to have, in order to be a standard definition, communities will have at least one common characteristic. That means they'll have a shared interest, or there'll be geography, or there'll be values. And I think that takes into everything that you just defined earlier. Then we've got, when we talk about engagement, in order for people to actually be engaged, there must be an understanding of the purpose. An understanding of the purpose. I'm not sure about you, but I've been in meetings where I keep thinking, okay, why am I here? What is it this group really wants to do? And what I find interesting is most of the time I am the facilitator or the consultant that's supposed to be there to help them figure it out. But I'm not sure the people know yet. And so it requires a lot of work on the part of us, those of us who are going out into these communities, to help them figure that out. There also, and you said this earlier, there is a sense of ownership. And that comes in understanding and in applying our willingness, our resources. And the third factor is that commitment. We're committed to a process and an outcome. You said there had to be action. You're exactly right. So the fourth piece of engagement deals with they're willing to work to achieve the success. Without those components, there's no engagement. I think that the action part that many of you mentioned right here at the end is probably the most significant piece related to engagement. So it's community engagement. If we had to define it officially, it would be a process. It would require us to work collaboratively, and it would require us to work through groups of people. And so if we put the definition together, that's where we would be. Now, there is an alternative to community engagement. I think you would agree, and it's a closed relationship. When communities are not being engaged, it just simply means that we're done. We're closed. We've made the decision. We're moving forward. Some people might refer to that as a dictatorship. Some people may have others. Let me show you an example, and let's ask the question. Take a look at this slide. This is called the SeeClickFix. And what it is, there is a community in Connecticut, you may know it and may work with it, in New Haven, that gathers information from its residents using this website. So is this a community engagement? Thumbs up if you think it is. Thumbs down if you think this is just an easy way just to gather information. It's not engagement, it's just gathering information. What do you think? Some of you like it, some of you not so sure. All right. Let me tell you a little bit more about this and see what you think. There are companies who will provide consulting services to local governments to help them look at their electronic communication, and they will frame it around the need to engage citizens electronically. Now, that is a true method of engagement. No, it is not face-to-face. It does not involve discussion. There's no commitment. But there's a but here. The but is that a lot of communities believe this is the first level of engagement, that if you can get people to enter information through electronic media, that it will step them up. I don't know if you've looked at, there's a website called digitalcommunityengagement.com, digitalcommunityengagement.com. And their goal is to provide government transparency through online transactions and the opportunity to be heard and to hear. So if communities chose to use electronic communication as the first phase, then the second phase is to find a way to bring people together so that you can have action. You can have the discussions and you can build the action. So think of electronic communication as one. Now, I think some of you, I love it. It's really low level. Yes, it is. It is only the first step. Let's see what Kat, the problem is too many think if you use digital tool or social media, you're networked, but being networked and engaged isn't just a tool or mechanism, it's a mindset. Exactly. It is a mindset. We have to start somewhere. And when you think about how a lot of our communities, and maybe your communities are different, but when I work out in Virginia, I find that it is very difficult to get people to physically step into a room for a conversation. They have to know that there is something in it for them, or the issue has to be affecting them. So when we think about how do we start people in a conversation, electronic media may be one way. And we also use, in many cases, our print media or radio media just to start generating a dialogue on some of the issues. And then you hope, just like you do with any type of electronic media, you hope to lead them back to the hub. Sometimes the hub is a website where lots of information is given. Sometimes the hub is a community meeting. Sometimes it's small group meetings or neighborhood-based meetings. So just think of this as the launching point. Okay, let's take a look about why community engagement is needed. And I think all of these reasons are here. And but basically, when you think about communities have a hope. They have a hope that if they gather people together, that something is going to happen, that they're going to diversify and increase the number of stakeholders, hopefully, that they're going to get some new information from some of the people attending. You know, one of the factors that I know, and I think you know too, is that no one person holds all the truths, that we have to gather and we have to ask other people what they think. We also hope that when we present the idea, that someone is going to say, hey, let's take a look at how we might do this differently. So it guides that development of the project, or it expands it. And all of a sudden you may be thinking of a way to explore this idea differently. So overall, you enrich the initiative totally. And you really do create a network. So there are several things listed here. When you try to engage your community, what drives you? Of all of these things listed about why it's needed and what it will do, what drives you? Any comments on that? All right, I'm going to leave you with that then. I have to tell you that most of the time I am trying to build a network and build some relationships in there. And then we find that is probably one of the first factors that drive me. And then the other piece is definitely about expanding and enriching the initiative, to find out the things that I don't know, things that are unexposed, to increase diversity, to explore the network. So we're going to go on to talk about a little bit about when it's not needed. And I bet you probably have experienced this in many ways, that groups are just not at the point to expand its discussion to others. They're just not there. You see the graphic image in the bottom where they're having a lot of face-to-face discussion. Everybody is all on top of each other in a way, but they're not ready yet. The small group hasn't really gotten to the point where they can push it out into a larger discussion. If you have not read Russ Linden, Linden's book, Working Across Boundaries, he's written two. He's in the Charlottesville area of Virginia, right outside of the University of Virginia. And he's written two books about leadership and working, and leading across boundaries and working across boundaries. And he said that in many cases, the readiness of a group is defined by their history. Their history if they have conflict internally, if they have conflict with groups externally, the external stakeholders. If that is the case, that has to be resolved first before they can invite others to come in. He also talked about that many times when the cost of engagement are higher than the benefits. Can you think of times when the cost of engaging others in a conversation about a project or an initiative would be higher or would be more than what the group would need? Oh yeah, definitely you see the group development always operating, absolutely. I want to remind you on group development that there's one that Tuckman didn't discuss that he should have, and that was groups need to adjourn. There always needs to be a time. So when folks come to the table with an agenda, that's helpful. It does help them to set the purpose. Think about, are there other times, I want you to think a little bit about the cost. Yeah, when the hidden agendas are not disclosed, absolutely. Lots of individuals, that cost factor will cause more conflict. Yep, got it. Got it, understand. Thank you for that. There are other times too when sometimes that cost, it means that you may have to create a partnership with a group that may or may not be true to your values. So I want you to be alert to that. That when you think about what does your group value, what does your community value, and if you have to enter into a collaborative working arrangement with another group where their values may not be the same, the cost may be too big. There's also, yes, you're exactly right. Conflict is often generated for all of us, not just with groups, because of fear of change. So that, when you work with groups, that's probably one of the first things you want to talk about is what would happen if this project were successful, and what would be changed, and what emotions or what issues does that generate for a community. I know those of you involved with faith-based communities, so often those faith-based communities want to engage in a lot of change. They want to grow their institutions, their churches and others, but they forget that as they grow, the new people have new ideas. And so that has always been one issue with that. And that you're right, identifying with political or entity or issue focus groups is also another factor that would be when the cost would be too big. And so sometimes you need to say, we're going to work with who we have at the table. We're not going to seek out further engagement. The other, number 3 that's listed up here is when critical stakeholders refuse to participate. It's very difficult sometimes if you have a stakeholder who is very stubborn or perhaps maybe sees the issue differently and is going to share that with everybody in the room, and they come across as being very negative without having any vision. And that may not be the case at all. There are other times when it is the case. And at those points, our job as extension professionals is to help the group find ways to work around, find ways to move around the group so that the project or the initiative can move forward without letting one person or one small group derail the entire effort. When you also look at this, sometimes agreement is not reached on project goals. That's going back, if you remember when we first started, I love it. Working across the aisle can imply that different interests outweigh common interests, since aisles can be moat. That's a wonderful way to say that. Thank you very much. When we look at about, you mentioned earlier about having agendas, or really the intent was that people come with hidden agendas. But most of the time when groups come together, they do have a focus. They know kind of what direction they want to go, what they want to achieve. But until that group really sets its project goals, it needs to stay in the discussion mode a little bit longer before it starts to bring in other people to help them achieve that goal. The final factor when collaboration or engagement is not yet ready is it says when people accountable don't really want others involved. And that has happened so many times. You have the kingdoms that have been built. People want to drive it because their project is what they want to do. They're not ready to engage others. And if you do, and then those people don't feel useful, needed, appreciated, valued, then you have created more challenge. The cost at that moment becomes greater than the benefit. It's important that as you and we as an extension work with these community groups, that we help them to assess their project's readiness. Are they ready to go and to work with other people, or is it a no-go? Do we need to step back a little bit? And that's going to be part of the initial planning, which we'll talk more about in just a little bit. Okay, so what makes this happen? What makes it happen when it works? It's obvious. It requires project leadership. Now, who's the project leadership? Who is that? It's always going to be a person or a small group of people that's going to be giving leadership to that. It could be the community member. It could be a consultant that you've brought in. It could be an elected official who's providing leadership to this. But one of the factors when you think about this project leadership, this group or individual, there are characteristics of these leaders that make the difference. So I want you to reflect back on all of your leadership training, everything that you have worked on. What characteristics or values of leaders make engagement work or would encourage engagement? What characteristics would you suggest? Type those just one or two words each in the chat box. You've talked about communication. You've talked about commitment. You've talked about the confidence that the person has. You've talked about the empathy, understanding, courage, definitely courage, because you're going to be saying some things. Having a vision. I think we know, well, you've probably read several of the leadership books that are out there, but I think it was Coos and Posner that talked about that the difference between a contributor, a member, and a leader was vision. That everybody's contribute, but it's vision. Being able to think at the strategic level, creating synergy. I think you also, definitely integrity and authenticity. I think earlier you also talked a little bit of connect individuals in the community. These people need to know people. They need to know how the community operates. Who are the players? Where's the money? You know, what's the political history? You know, what has happened in the past that's going to go? So there's a lot that goes into this leadership role, all of the things. And I really like, it's this confidence to let go of control, which is an illusion anyway. You're right. Confidence to let go of control. When an individual as a leader is confident in themselves, they're confident in the project. If they value inclusion, and if they're a communicator, they will set themselves up as a positive leader, not the dictator, but a positive leader who can apply the right leadership process. Respected is part of that. Confidence, we're talking about, we can convene but not control. We can influence. You know, leadership is a synonym for influence. or influence is a synonym for leadership. We can influence by many different ways as a leader, by being the way we organize things, the way we engage people, by our research that we do before sessions happen. All of that has to come into play. Set their ego aside, absolutely. Take responsibility, give credit. Everybody wants to be appreciated, right? Everybody. And when we can give the credit to the people that are doing the work, we are going to make sure it happens as leaders, but the credit goes to those that are walking the walk beside us. Very important too. Y'all are phenomenal. Walk on water, maybe. Well, we'll just hope the water's frozen, right? I don't know. Okay, now that's about a leader. Now I'm going to ask you this question. I want you to think about the group, because the leader has certain responsibilities and characteristics that will move them forward. But I also want you to think about the group, the role of the group, the role of the group. What characteristics of group members make engagement successful? Enter some words that relate to the group member. Okay, they're committed, they're willing to be contributors. Transparency, that means no hidden agendas, right? They say what they say they're going to do. And being open, good listeners, work together, flexible, willingness to negotiate, yeah, diverse, inclusive, exactly, that they are open to having, they recognize that the diversity of the group is essential to success. They know where the stakeholders are. And that they understand, yes, there is a leadership. There has to be some organization, some structure. I think you're hitting on all the topics, and this is exactly what we heard from the community about leadership and about group participation. As we work with these groups, let me go back to this last thing that was just posted, statement that was just posted. Ask good questions of yourself and of others. There's accountability in there where our group is holding us accountable. We're asking the right questions. The last session we did, we talked about the 6 thinking hats and about the process of questioning during any kind of planning stages. There's also the process of planning, of strategic planning. So you know that it's worth every group investment in time is to have things in writing of what we want to achieve, what action steps do we need to take, who's going to do it, what's our timeline, and you have some kind of status report. So between having a leader who is open and understanding, who's listening, who's left the ego, who understands that they are managing and supporting and coaching, and they're the catalyst for conversation, but they're not in control, they're not the dictator. And having a group who's committed and who's open to new ideas and engaging others and respects leadership and respects each other and willing to move forward with ideas. With those two coming together, you've got something that will make it happen. You've got something that will make it happen. Now, I want to say one thing before I leave this, and I love all the elected officials out there, all of them. There has been some work done that says maybe elected officials are not always the best group to move projects forward. And so elected officials are wise to choose or to work with community champions. Have you found this to be true? Do you think? Is that a yes or a no? Approve or disapprove, maybe? Okay. I think some of you have experienced, well done. I think you're experiencing that too, and that's hard. You know, we are funded in extension by local government in part, and so we don't want our elected officials to not know that they are valued, they have the vote. But if they have a project that they want to move forward, we have to help them to understand that they're not the king or the queen, and we need to engage others, and let's talk about the stakeholders. And it's many times I've had a lot of indirect conversations with stakeholders. So that's just kind of something I want you to keep in the back of your mind about that. And there's actually an article that was published let me see. It's called From Public Engagement to Problem Solving, and when we get you the handout, there's actually a summary of that article in there. It's published by the National League of Cities based on its publication Beyond Civility, and I'll get you that. But it talks about how local leaders could set the stage, but more or less there's a process. So let's talk about that process. Okay. So we are Extension. We step into communities ready to help them to move forward with whatever it is that community sees as valuable and they've asked our help for. So how do we set the stage? Well, you've said it already. One, there's got to be a shared purpose, and the purpose has to be defined. We know there has to be a willingness to collaborate. We know there has to be a commitment to contributing. We have to have participation by the right people. There has to be an open and credible process versus the opposite of that, closed and suspicious. And we have to involve a champion with credibility and clout. The last one we talked about, that was very important, especially when working with elected officials. Sometimes we are fortunate enough that an elected or an appointed official is that champion. And if we engage that person, it becomes a win-win for everybody. Let's move on. We'll talk about a little bit more. I'm going to leave time for some Q&A, and because we're learning from each other, and you have so much experience, you're going to share a lot of your insights as we move forward in this. So I want to make sure we have some time for that too. Okay, so let's think about the process. And I'm going to use some examples how it's worked for me. And if you've got some ideas or thoughts, I want you to share them too. So the first step in the process, it says convene a small group to clarify and validate the vision. I'm going to give you an example. I worked with a school board in Virginia a few years ago. The board chair called me and said, Martha, would you come and help me think this thing through? Said, I really want to get together all the leaders in our community. I want us to build a network where we can sit down and we can talk with each other all the time and let each other know about what's going on. I don't want our community to have conflict between school boards and boards of supervisors. In Virginia, the Board of Supervisors control the funds of the school board. The school board does not have the right to tax in Virginia, but they have the right to govern the school system. The Board of Supervisors governs the county, or the city council governs the city, but the school board doesn't govern. So can you see some conflict opportunities there? Well, Virginia can, and has had them, and still has them. So this school board chair said, I'm gonna be proactive, and we're gonna stop this before it ever starts. I said, sure. So I went, we met with them. We started by having a conversation with the school board chair and the school system superintendent, and we found out what they wanted to do. And then from there, I got the school board chair to agree to invite a few people to lunch. And so we met with the Chamber of Commerce president and the executive director, and we met with the County Board of Supervisors and chair, and we met with a couple of proactive people in the school system, and we met with some of the recreation people. And we just had these small conversations all around the county. And then finally, we got a lot of consensus that this was a really good idea. So we brought everybody together. Everybody had seen the vision, they validated the concept, and they came together into one space. And we started having a monthly gathering where they came together, they shared some ideas. From those ideas, there was generated some action. We even hosted a community-wide forum where people could give some input on some of the initiatives in the county. I worked with that group probably about 18 months, and it was very successful. Life was good. Everybody was happy. They were coming to the meetings. Things were good. And then I decided, after about 6 months, usually I'm transitioning myself out of that role. And I began the transition phase around 6 months, but the group wasn't ready to let go. They still needed that support. From there, we began to build bylaws, and we went through organizational structure, and we got a nominating committee. And so about 18 months, it was time for me to go. And it was turned over to a group of people who agreed to, and had been active to accept leadership roles. What was the result? The result was the coalition failed. The coalition failed because the leadership that accepted the role was not as committed as they had appeared to be. The entire group could never generate enough leadership without those selected, or without my assistance and the assistance of a couple of other local staff people, to make that coalition move forward. So from this, we know that not just from my experience, from research throughout, coalitions are fragile. Has this happened to you? When you think you've got the right group together, you've worked with them, they know what they're about, they're moving forward, and then somewhere or another things just stop? Any comments? I'm watching the chat box for that. Yeah, a few hands being raised. So when we think about this and how fragile coalitions are, lack of follow-through, some of you agree, they lost interest, they didn't have time, they got overwhelmed, all of them fell apart. I know, so I want to tell you one of the factors that what we have tried to do. We have tried to put any new initiative into a system, a community system, something that is already in existence, some entity that has staff support. So I want you to be alert to that. Overcommitment and lack of planning, two big contributors to this. Volunteers are busy people, people who volunteer, yes. People want to achieve more than they can achieve. I have to remind groups constantly that they cannot deal with world peace today. They can only deal with a small segment of it. So I want you to think about one rule that would be helpful to us to always remember. When coalitions with new initiatives are coming together, which is wonderful, we want new ideas, new energy, new access to resources, we want to bring them all together. But somewhere along the line, there has to be a system in place that can adopt this new initiative. So we ask the coalitions to start thinking about where does this fit in somewhere that's already organized. Or if it doesn't fit, how do you get the funding to employ the staff that can help lead this forward? Because a group of volunteers will only work at something for so long. Only work at something. They will do all the things you just listed. They'll see the vision and they'll think it'll happen. They want it to happen tomorrow, and they get disenchanted with the idea. Now, as we move forward in that, all of these things that are listed under this process have to be identified and worked through. The community that you're going to work with has to be defined. They have to understand the community's characteristics, some of the pitfalls and the positive successes. And they have to go into that community, whatever it is, whether it is a group of people that's a community, a geographic region that's a community, an organization that's a community, whatever it is, then they have to build that relationship. One of the factors for success when you're working in any communities, and I'm sure you know this, is that they must know who the community gatekeeper is. There's usually a group or a group of people or something that's going to open the door for you to make things happen. Common interest is definitely part of that. When you're having all of these conversations, I want to just say one other thing, that Switch, if you haven't read the book Switch, Dan and Chip Heath I think Dan Heath is at Duke University and Chip is at Stanford, I think that's where they're from. They wrote a little book called Switch, S-W-I-T-C-H, fabulous book if you haven't read it on leadership. And they suggested that when you are working with communities on new initiatives, you want to keep the people focused on a fast success. Fast success. That means get the goal, find a way to create something that's going to create a presence and a success for that group. All right, let's go over here to a question real quick, and then we'll come back. How do you deal with self-appointed community gatekeeper who does not really represent the community? If I were in person with you as a group, we would answer this. So you're stuck with me for right now. You're right, it is a good question. I think that goes back, let's go back to the very first item there. Celebrating early, yes, low-hanging fruit, yes, early successes. But I want to go back to the question before I move into any other comments. See where it talks about convene a small group to clarify and validate the vision? This is where we, as Extension, begin to recognize that one person may think of themselves as the self-appointed gatekeeper, and that I'm going to direct you in these ways. Because we have to stay impartial, we begin to explore on other avenues, and we will say, I will say, have we talked to so-and-so? Let's find out what this person says. Well, let's talk to this person, and I'm beginning to gather information. And when I do my summary for the self-appointed gatekeeper, I'm going to recommend that this gatekeeper look at other areas. And then when we bring people together as a full group, where we begin to clarify and to build a common interest, we're going to find out, and we'll do it probably more in indirect ways, that one person is not going to be the focus. I know that doesn't make a lot of sense to you, but it's by inclusion. When we value the inclusion and we seek input from other people, we usually can circumvent that. Thanks, Amanda, for bringing that up. Let's see. Our problem is that we've had good support system from the volunteers. We had all fired up, but no one came up for the FAST event, and people became very disillusioned. You know, I think we probably need to talk more about that, what was really happening with that situation. A good support system from the volunteers. Right, with campaigns you usually make sure you've got the big announcements on go, so that gives you the fast success. I'd love to talk to you more about how when you get, and how people became disillusioned when it didn't happen. I think somebody said earlier, sometimes it's about planning. It's about not having the right vision or not having the right goal set, or not at the right time. All of those factors influence success. So I'm not sure if I can give you advice on that. Right, an open mic. You have at least one good singer or one good poet. Right, I love that. You stack the deck. Yes. And that's going to happen through your conversations you have inside the community. Just like when I was working with the group, you start with one person's idea, but you've got to go out and feel out the community and prime the pump. You betcha. Okay, that's exactly right. I think y'all got it. You got it. I'm good with that. And as a good facilitator, you are able to ask the questions to help guide the group, and as a good extension educator, you are also able to get the facts and present the summary. It may not be in the public meeting, it may be outside, but you're going to build those common interests around, and you work to engage those people. It is not easy, it's just complicated. I think that's probably the way to say it. Okay, let's move on a little bit about the stages. Do you have, and Ellen, you probably can help me with this, did we send everybody, all the participants, they have access to the handout? If not, we'll send it out to them later.
The handout is posted on the website, and I'll talk about that at the close of this presentation.
Okay, good, good, thank you. All right, in your handout, I have given outline for you everything I have just said. And in here, it talks about 4 stages based on the research. It has 4 stages for engagement. And the first stage is setting the stage. And we just talked about that. And that involves more than just the public and going out and gathering the people. It involves when you get people together. So often, and you see in this picture that I've used for VCU, Virginia Commonwealth University, this was a conversation we were having with a group of people. How do you set up the room so that people are engaged? How do you let people know each other? What's the environment? All that you learn through good facilitation technique. Who is going to provide leadership? Remember how you said you prime the pump? Well, we've got to prime the pump on leadership too. Who's going to step up as your champion? Who's going to be the face of this group? Make sure you know the issue. If you get this many people together, I think it was a little over 100 people together this session, you better know what the issue is. And someone had better have done the research on why this really is an issue. What are the conditions that exist? What are the facts? So when I work with groups, I always have them start out by laying out the environment. What do we know about the current situation? What's driving? What are the facts that are driving this issue? And then we talk about how do we want to approach the issue. And that really steps into phase 2. And this is how, probably not the first meeting. It may be a little bit in the first meeting to kind of prime the pump, as you said, but it's more about getting them together again to hear the facts one more time, to have other people report. It all should not come from one person. That's valuing inclusion by you're getting the right people there, you're getting them to report. It also builds the buy-in. The other piece to this is beginning the brainstorming session. I think you know brainstorming well because extension educators normally are good facilitators, and there are all kinds of ways to brainstorm. One of the pitfalls of brainstorming is that people think just because we sat in this room and came up with all these ideas means they're all good and we need to do them all, and if you don't do my idea, I'm going to be upset about it. So that's part of laying out the ground rules for brainstorming, is that we're going to generate lots of thought, but then we're going to have to vet each one of these ideas to really see if they align with our vision, if they align with our values, if they're feasible, if we've got support, what the tools are, do we have the capacity to move them forward. And that's when you can begin to actually utilize the group and you set up small task force or whatever you want. And then you come back at another time and actually go through all these ideas and begin to prioritize. One of the factors I always remind groups when they are brainstorming is that, and they are prioritizing, is that just because an idea doesn't make the top whatever, does not mean the idea is lost. It's on the sheet. It will stay on the sheet. The third phase is in the planning. Now, you said earlier that the lack of planning was one of the factors that drove failure. You are right. Planning and review is very important. Planning must take place on paper. Dan Heath in the book Switch wants to know wants people to answer the question, if this really happens, how will we know what it looks like when the changes happen? So he encourages us that part of the planning is we describe the conditions, what the conditions will be when the positive change has happened. I think that's a pretty solid tool. Then you review that plan, and there are some tools of planning that lots of us like to use. You know, there's some formats, some sheets, some tables, charts, anything you want to use that works for planning. Finally, it's in the implementation. Didn't you tell me earlier that discussion, conversation without action is useless? Well, this is where that phase 4 brings it in. We have got to implement what we agree to, and it has to be evaluated. Now, community engagement can be evaluated in one way, but community engagement around an issue is evaluated in the impact action has on the issue. We know that. That's why we work in extension. We understand impact. So as an extension educator, you've got to think about, what am I evaluating? Am I evaluating the impact on the issue, or am I evaluating the amount of engagement. You know, how many people came? How many came to more than 2 sessions? What's the percentage that actually worked through the implementation phase? You know, what impact did it have on the trust factor of the group? You know, I'm not sure what you would want to evaluate, but some of those areas come in. All of that has to go into a feedback process that goes back to gathering the facts again, looking at the issue, and continuing. One of the factors that I want to make sure we understand here is that if you're just working with volunteers, you have to have an exit strategy. Remember when you talked about earlier Tuckman's group development, and that he talks about 4 stages? There was a 5th stage that I mentioned, and that's adjournment. How do you know when the group has done its work? How do you know when people can leave? If they can't leave, then how are they going to transition? Are they going to transition into an association? Are they going to transition into a nonprofit? Are they going to become part of a subcommittee or a subgroup of some other system? Remember, I said you've got to be able to transition this group into some system approach. It is very difficult to keep volunteers focused and moving forward. When we look at this, I want to show you, I want to show you the summary. This summary I think it's Francis Butterfoss who did this along with Tegler. And if we look at this theory, this was used by the Community Health, the Center for Disease Control has done a lot of work in community engagement. And this is one of the diagrams that was developed. So if you think about what we just talked about, it really follows. You notice you've got somebody who's convening the group. You've got the membership that's coming together. There are processes that are put out. There's leadership and staffing and structure that's needed. Then there's the synergy that begins to build, and the resources are pooled, and then there's some planning and assessment. The fact-finding happens. And then we begin to implement, and then we see changes. We've built capacity. And you notice where they talk about health and social outcomes because that was what they were focused on. Well, that could be community development or whatever engagement, whatever outcome we want. But notice there's a continuum at the bottom where it talks about formation, maintenance, and institutionalization. It is the institutionalization factor that you want to remember. That's when it becomes part of the community system, something that's going to be there. Do you have a reaction to this? Is this clear? Would you agree with it? Do you disagree? Where do you see the weak points of this? What do you see? Good. Let's talk about definition of community capacity. Community capacity in the way we have worked in definition is that you have individuals who have leadership ability, who understand all of the things you mentioned earlier, from listening skills to planning skills to inclusion skills. So you have people, number one. 2, those people can access resources. Sometimes they're financial, sometimes they're structural, sometimes they're technical support. They access resources. You also have capacity for planning and assessment and implementation. You also have the capacity to gain the support from elected leaders. So all of that, when you think about community capacity, all of that's there. How'd I do? Yes, exiting is, thanks Jim. You're right, exiting is one of the biggest challenges I see projects extension goes, right on the money. That's why when I go in working with a group, I explain to them that my job is to help you achieve your goals. These are not my goals. If they're my goals, I'm going to stay in my office and make them happen if I can. But they're not my goals, they're your goals. And no one's going to come to do these goals except for you. So let's find out what you need to make it happen. And I'm walking in with a toolbox filled with resources. You know, if they need extensions help, look at all of the tools we've got. I mean, if we need to do leadership development in the community, if we need to do strategic planning, if we need to help them to get educational information on a topic, whatever it is, We've got access to universities and to other states. We've got so much we're walking in. But I want them to see it, and they're going to manage it. I made my mistake when I first joined Extension working with this school board group. I don't like to fail, so I push it out to them. Let's get, if a community group is institutionalized around an issue, how do you convene the next group to tackle the next issue, perhaps an unrelated issue? I think you have to start at the beginning. Unrelated issue, who's interested, have the conversation, step through the process again, and it may not fit in underneath the same institutionalized group that it started with. It may need another home. It may need other champions. But if it's an issue, you have to start at the beginning. Okay? I'm going to give you some examples just briefly because, again, we're getting close to the end of the day. But I want to talk to you about Virginia for just a little bit. And I want to share with you just some quick examples of some issues and how communities worked on it, how they did it. So I'm going to run through a few things, and I'm going to leave this list of people, a list of counties here in case you need it. And we actually have a summary of this posted on Extension's website. So if I haven't given this to you, I will give it to you. In 2004 in Shenandoah Valley, poultry farmers were in jeopardy of losing their livelihood when Pilgrim's Pride announced that it would close its Shenandoah Valley Turkey Division. A group of farmers banded together and they formed the Virginia Poultry Growers Cooperative. Because of this group, the loss of millions of dollars among residents in the localities where it boarded. What advice did this group offer to the community? Identify leaders who were committed to the project and capable of listening to a variety of input and to the experts. Leaders must be able to assess information and make decisions without emotional influence. Turf issues must be set aside. The public and stakeholders must be kept informed. Doesn't this sound like what you have already said? Let me tell you about another one. Culpeper County and the town of Culpeper, which is in the Northern Virginia area, developed an agreement for the expansion and development of the town and secured public water and sewer services. Through the collaboration of both the governments, the voluntary settlement agreement was written and approved. Now, to have an agreement between a town and a county, between a county and a city, is huge in Virginia. This agreement resolved 20 or more years of dispute over two major issues, avoiding duplication of services and epitomizing cooperation between jurisdictions. In Pittsylvania County, a small group of Pittsylvania County farmers gathered with their extension agent in a back room of a local Farm Bureau office to discuss the need to build a small office building. They also were concerned over policies and the lack of interaction with the governing bodies. As a result of that discussion, plans were made, people were engaged, and within 3 years, goals were reached. By 2011, the Land Value Use Assessment Taxation Program had been modified, a Director of Agriculture employed, a nonprofit organization established, and a $5 million agricultural complex constructed. Huge successes. I know this not because they told me, but because the extension agent brought me in, and I worked with that local extension agent and with this group until they reached their goals. That was a success. I want to tell you about Highland County. In 2004, the Highland County farming community began a discussion on how to address consistently low prices for agricultural stock and products, a lack of marketing opportunities for its livestock and farm products, a lack of skills for implementing marketing strategies. In 2012, a state-of-the-art slaughter and processing facility was opened and began operating as Allegheny Meats. This facility is designed to provide sustainable marketing opportunities for local products to increase farm revenues. The Highland County project was recognized in 2012 and received an award by the Southern Economic Development Council as a best practice. There's so many more to share. I want to show you the result of what one community did. In Danville, which is actually where my office is located, which is in the southern part of the state, it has been plagued by high unemployment rates, so much transition. But it's recognized over the last decade, well, really probably the last 15 years, that it had to launch something new. Recently, a key building in the downtown area that had been an eyesore for decades was torn down. This was funded, or the vision was held by a funder, a local foundation, and said, look, we want to do something to help. The city government got involved, the city government and some of the other community members began to building a project called the River District. And they came together after hours and hours of dialogue, and they brought it to the community to discuss what they could do. In April of this past year, they hosted a downtown meeting of such. It was actually a downtown block party where investors, community members, city planners, they all came together, and they had an artist who stood on the corner, and people came up and said, what do you think about this, and what do you think about that? And as they offered their ideas, they generated this beautiful piece of artwork capturing the thoughts and the ideas of the community in one evening. And it also celebrated their downtown and launched their River District. So you see, based on that, based on all the comments, I have a little bit of advice. This is based on their experiences. They tell us to confirm at the timing that it's the right time and the right idea. They tell us to establish partnerships, work as a team, bring in the experts on the content. They tell us to communicate, to listen, to articulate the ideas, the proposal, to hold the face-to-face meetings. Remember we started out with the website? Well, they've got it all posted on the website too, but that does not replace the face-to-face. They tell us to provide access to the information. They want us to make not only to access it, but also to assess it. We should put that in there too, to make sure the facts are there. They want to make sure that everybody understands that it has to be a balanced and logical approach based on a clear vision, people included, and that we secure this right support from the local leadership. And finally, probably the most powerful statement of all, be patient and be persistent. One group I heard from had taken over a decade to finally get their library established in their community. It was the persistence that held them through. So I open it up to you now. Questions, insights, anything you want to share. Well, I want to thank the group for allowing me to be with you today.
And I want to thank everyone for participating. We do have a brief evaluation we'd ask your input on. It's a SurveyMonkey link. And let you know that the next webinar is going to be on January 8th. And the topic will be Engaging Youth, and our presenter will be Lauren Traster. The website is listed here on this slide. For more information, visit our website. When you go there, if you, across the top there are breadcrumbs. If you click on webinars, and then on the far left, each module will be listed there, and this particular webinar will be listed under Working in Groups. So if you click on Working in Groups, go in there, you'll find this webinar. You'll find a link to the SurveyMonkey assessment. You'll find a link to the handout that Martha has referred to a couple times. It's a wonderful handout, 14 pages long, lots of great information. I encourage you to go there and pick up that handout. And if you'd like to contact us about any programming, any of the other modules, any of the services that we're offering through Building Capacity, please do that. The email is capacity@uvm.edu. And once again, thank you so much, Martha. We really appreciate having you with us, and hopefully you can come back again next year and be part of this. We really appreciate the information that you bring to the Building Capacity series. And so we are scheduled to close at 12:15, so if there are any other questions, we have a couple minutes. We're happy to hear from you. If not, thank you again for joining us.